See, in the world that we live in, we have things like crossovers, which are hatchbacks pretending to be SUVs. We have SUVs, which are everywhere. And then there comes the very rarefied world of the off-roader. Now, through all the marketing material that we could find on the new Land Rover Defender, which has been around since shortly after Moses parted the Red Sea and is now only in its second generation, we couldn't find a single use of the term SUV. This is an off-roader, which is why it remains as capable as ever, despite its new monocoque construction, its new set of engines, a new set of powertrains, and this svelte new design, if that's really the word for it. But where the Defender has gone from being a true off-roader into something a little bit more luxurious and a little bit more likely to be seen in the urban sprawl, our question remains, is this actually a Defender that you can drive every day? Or is it still as compromised as the first generation Defender which came about many, many, many decades ago? Well, in this video, we'll find out. This is Malaysian Motoring. My name is Aiman Abdullah, and before we get into it, be sure to hit subscribe and hit the bell to be notified every time we make a new upload. But ladies and gentlemen, this is our review of the Land Rover Defender. Now, before we get into the rest of the review, we have to first give you a little bit of an overview on the Land Rover Defender. Now in its second generation, which has taken many, many years for Land Rover to get just right, the new Defender is available in three body styles. We have the 90, which is essentially a 3-door. You have the 110, which we have here, which is a 5-door, or you can get a 5-door 130. Now the 130 is an extra long version of this vehicle, which is not yet available in Malaysia, but we're made to understand will be available at some point. Now, in addition to that, there are two engines to choose from. You can either have this, the P300, which packs a 2-litre 4-cylinder turbocharged engine with power going to all 4 wheels via an 8-speed automatic gearbox, or you can upgrade into the P400, which gets you a 3-litre straight 6 mild hybrid, again with power going to all 4 wheels via the same 8-speed automatic gearbox. What is also standard on the Defender is in terms of the exterior kit, because as you can see, this Defender is pretty much kitted out, which it bloody well should be given the fact that this starts at about 900,000 ringgit. Now up front you get full LED headlights, replete with this lovely signature Defender LED daytime running light signature, which I think looks fantastic. You get functional LED fog lights down there, you have Defender scripting all the way across, and as far as I'm concerned, the front end of the new Defender really does capture the spirit of the previous generation. Of course, everything's been smoothed out a little bit in order to improve aerodynamics, although what really is the point? As you move further back onto the bonnet, you have this lovely flat space up here which looks fantastic from the driver's view, and you even have this sort of cross-hatch pattern up here, again to sort of remind you of the original Defender where you used to have these cross-hatch patterns on top of the front fenders which allowed you to stand on the bonnet. You can't do that in this, by the way. And the side of the Defender, I think, is just as successful as the front because, again, it captures the spirit of the Defender while still bringing it kicking and screaming into the 21st century. Now, rolling stock is handled by a set of 20-inch alloy wheels wrapped in Goodyear Wrangler all-terrain tires. Now, the design may look relatively simple, and you're right, but as far as I'm concerned, I think that that is, again, in keeping with the spirit of the Defender. You have these very flared over fenders, repeat with a little notch here again to make it look a little bit more like an off-roader. You have Defender scripting here along with this side panel. Now on this side, this vent is functional and you can actually spec this car up in such a way that you have a snorkel which is built into the A-pillar, which looks very streamlined for an off-road snorkel. And the intake's actually at the back, again to improve wading depth. Now, one of the things that you may notice about this car is that it does sit very high. Now the Defender sits as standard on air suspension regardless of which model you get, and so there is an access mode where the Defender sits a little bit lower, there's an off-road mode where it sits a little bit higher, and then there is this which is the standard mode altogether. And to improve ingress and egress, you get deployable side steps as standard. Now in terms of the non-standard parts, there are a couple of accessories on this car worth noting. Firstly, This panel here, this painted panel here, comes as standard on all Defenders, but it is made to be used like this, so you can actually mount accessories on the side. You can get an adventure box, which adds a little bit of exterior storage, which is lockable. And on this car, we actually have the deployable side steps, which gives you a little bit better access up to the roof rack, which has a static load of 300 kilograms and a dynamic load of about 130, which is pretty good going regardless of how you look at it. Now, of course, you can get a myriad of accessories for your Defender. In fact, the accessories catalog for this car ranges up to 170 different items, which means that chances are, even if several of your neighbors have Defenders, none of them are going to be exactly alike. I love how the back end of the Defender just cuts off ever so neatly, with the only protruding parts on this car being this little bit of the rear bumper, as well as obviously the external spare wheel. Now, the light design back here is again a deliberate nod towards the original Defender, where you used to have two larger units here and then two smaller units on the side. And overall, like I said, it does look really successful. You get Defender badging here, although you can actually get a spare wheel cover with Defender badging across there. And if you go for the P400, there'll also be some more badging up on this side. Now, one of the things about the Defender that I'm not the biggest fan of is the fact that this is not a tailgate the way anyone else would be used to, although that said, with the spare wheel on it, that would be pretty much useless. Instead, this is a swing door, which arguably is not quite as practical as what you'd get on some other SUVs, because it does require a lot more clearance in order for you to open this fully. That said though, this space is quite usable because you have your emergency stuff all nicely hidden away in here, like the warning triangle. Nearly forgot about that. You also have a little hook here in order to help open and close the door. There's a little bit more storage here. And of course, you do have this enormous amount of space back here. This parcel shelf is cloth, where unlike other parcel shelves which sort of retract and so on, this is made so that you can fold it up nicely and then put it underneath the boot floor, where there is a lot of space. Now, the Defender 110, like we have it here, can be specified in Malaysia with 7 seats, although the one that we have here is a 5-seater. As a result, you have this expansive amount of space back here, more than enough space for you to put 5 people's worth of luggage. And if you notice, you have this sort of hard scored material on the backs of the seats as well as on the floor of the boot, so that everything back here doesn't sort of scuff up the car. Now, because this car rides on air suspension, you can actually lower the back end just a little bit in order to make loading things a little bit easier, although honestly I prefer sort of leaving it the way it's supposed to be. And of course, those rear seats can be folded 40-20-40 for maximum practicality, and if you're carrying longer items like skis, because many Malaysians get up to that sort of thing. Now, if you ask me, the Defender as an SUV so far fulfills criteria, even if Land Rover would prefer that you call it an off-roader. But all this exterior trickery is one thing. The bigger question is whether or not the Defender has transformed itself on the interior to properly arrive in the 21st century. On the surface, it certainly feels like it does, because everything that I can see and everything that I can touch feels very much updated and more in keeping with the Land Rover that we're used to today. So for starters, we now have the award-winning Pivi Pro infotainment system displayed on this beautiful curved touchscreen. Now, this display is absolutely stunning to look at. It is beautiful to interact with. It has all the systems and information that you'd expect to find from a system like this, and it's presented in such a beautiful way, which again is in keeping with the fact that this is damn nearly 1 million ringgit on the road. Now, the Pivi Pro also powers this beautiful driver's instrument cluster, which again is very sharp, very pretty, very accurate, and very beautifully executed, which again is in keeping with the fact that the Defender is now a little bit more of a luxury car than it used to be. Complementing this is a full color heads-up display, which also shows things like your driver assistance features and your turn-by-turn navigation, which again is in keeping with a vehicle that you'd find in the 21st century. Now, with systems like this, it's very easy for manufacturers to get rid of tactile buttons, especially for the HVAC controls, and integrate it all into the screen, because it does make life a little bit cheaper for them to manufacture. But Land Rover, understanding the way Defender customers work, have resisted that and instead left a whole bunch of these beautiful tactile buttons, which all work with a lovely, reassuring action to them, which I appreciate hugely. And on top of that, these buttons are multi-function, so if you push the controls For the driver or passenger side, you can adjust the heating and ventilated functionalities for the seats. And if you push on a couple of buttons, you can also adjust things like the vehicle's terrain response system, which again just helps to add to a certain degree of usability when it comes to the sort of customers that the Defender is angled towards. The same thing can be said of the steering wheel controls, which again, although they do integrate some degree of touch sensitivity, in the sense that the buttons actually change depending on what mode that you're in, they do still require a physical click in order to engage them, which again is a little bit more reassuring for the sort of customers that use vehicles like the Defender. Now, what I appreciate is the fact that all of the controls have all been centered in very ergonomically pleasing ways. So all the buttons that you generally look for are all up here or down here or all here, very accessible to the driver without having to move very far. The second reason for having all of the controls sort of centered here is because in other markets, you can specify the center console as a third sort of bench seat. And so you can fold this forward for an armrest, or you can fold it up and you can actually have somebody sat here, although obviously not for the Malaysian market. And that goes to show the usability that's been engineered into the Defender, because on the surface, yes, this looks like a luxury car, but there is a lot of functionality built into this. For example, you have a lot of these exposed rivets and exposed bodywork along the door cards, again to highlight the fact that this is a rougher and tougher off-roader. But on the dash front itself, you actually have integrated grab handles in order for you to be able to climb in and out of the truck a little bit easier. And I think that this is a fantastic way to do this instead of having a pillar up here, or rather a handle up here on the A pillar. On top of that, you have more grab handles up in front of the front passenger, which again frame that little bit of metal on the dashboard, which even has Defender written into it, which is lit beautifully at night. But although you have a lot of this exposed metal work around the place, it does still feel very upmarket, because this grab handle here, for example, is stitched leather. I have more stitched leather here along the center steering wheel boss, and I have a lot of soft touch materials in places where I would want there to be soft touch materials. There is also a huge amount of practicality. There is a large space here, big enough for you to put very, very large items actually. You have a couple of very large cup holders up here, and they even have this sort of rubberized cover, which I've kept in place because it's turned out to be a very nice place to put my phone. Your USB-C, USB-A, nano SIM ports are all here, including your 12-volt socket, which is great because it means that I can charge my phone. You have a wireless charger here and a very large center bin, which is slightly cooled, largely down to the fact that there is aircon vents on the back of the center console. These two front seats, as I mentioned earlier, are heated and ventilated. They are fully powered, replete with adjustable side bolsters, as well as lumbar support. And you even have memory functionality. Up to 3 profiles can be saved into this car, and they can be synced up with the in-control system here, which you can sign in with an app. As far as I'm concerned, everything here is fantastic, and that's even before we get onto things like this standard full panoramic sunroof, which looks great, lets a lot of light into the cabin, and for vehicles with a darker interior like this, certainly looks great. Now, at my height and with this seat set up in my driving position, as you can see, I have absolutely acres of knee room and a good amount of headroom, again, despite that panoramic sunroof. Now, if I were a little bit taller, I'd appreciate the fact that the floor is actually angled upwards ever so slightly underneath the rear seat in order to provide a perfect angle for you to rest your feet and fully utilize the under-thigh support provided by the Defender. Here, unfortunately, you do have actual physical grab handles on the pillar, but they actually double up as coat hooks with a little bit of space up here. You have some netting here, you've got some pretty decently sized door bins here, you have your aircon vents in the center, which are actually angled in such a way that they can blow to your face, and you have a couple of USB-C ports. Now, on the surface, everything back here certainly looks a little bit positive, but when you get into the details, there are a couple of things that I found a little bit irritating. For starters, the vents on this center console appear to not be straight, which is doing my head in ever so slightly. And the same can be said of the USB-C ports down here, which again don't appear to be fully aligned in a row, which would again do my head in. But if I ignore that bit, everything back here is really nice because it's very comfortable. Of course, there are ISOFIX mounts on the 2 outer seats. I have a nice center armrest with some cup holders, And overall, life back here is quite pleasant. I have a great view out. I sit nice and high, even higher than the front seats, for example, for that matter, which means I have a great view out there as well. And because this truck is very wide, it means that, again, my visibility is fantastic. And to further aid a little bit more light into the cabin, the new Defender comes as standard with the Arctic lights up here, which you get obviously on both sides to allow a little bit more light into the cabin, which again helps to create this slightly airier, slightly more spacious feeling. Now, if this was a 7-seater, you'd be able to fold these seats in order to access the third row, but this is not a 7-seater, which means this is all the space that you're really going to get. You can't slide these seats backwards and forwards, although really, what is the point? And if I had to complain about one thing in particular, it is the fact that there are no rear aircon controls for the second row passengers. At this price, I would have expected to be able to control my blower speed as well as my temperatures from back here, but instead I should rely on the front passenger in order to create a more comfortable environment back here. But again, this is really nitpicking because I could sit back here even with my feet sort of tucked in underneath me like this. I could sit back here for hours and take in a road trip without any issue whatsoever. This is a very pleasant place to be. But the question now is, does that pleasantness extend to the drive? For the most part, it does. Because the wonderful thing about the new Defender is that it is just a fantastically refined vehicle to drive. Compared to the old Defender, where from the moment you get in it, it was uncomfortable, it was cramped, the ergonomics were awful, and the seats were barely passable. The new Defender, naturally, is now a much more refined place to be. The seats are fantastic, the headrests are lovely and soft, all the controls fall very easily to hand, and for the most part, driving this is just an absolute ease. Sat here in a very typically Land Rover sort of seating position, you have a fantastic view all the way around. The glass house on this car is very generous, which means you have a great view all the way around. And like I said, the seats are comfy, the controls are very easy to use, and overall it's just a lovely place to be. Now, talking specifically about the car that we've got, this is the P300, which runs the 2-litre 4-cylinder turbocharged engine. Now, a 2-litre in a car like this might not seem particularly confidence-inspiring, but I can assure you that with Jaguar Land Rover's Ingenium range of engines, a 2-litre can be massaged to produce very, very healthy numbers, and so it never feels particularly underpowered. Driving it in town, this powertrain feels very civilized, and it is reactive and responsive enough for you to use on a day-to-day basis. And in terms of fuel economy, well, we've averaged about 13.2 litres per 100 kilometers, which I think is more to do with the fact that because this car is very heavy, the engine does have to work quite a bit to sort of get it off the line, but once it does get moving, things in this car are quite nice, and it all sort of quietens down rather nicely. If you are wondering, you can get a move on in the Defender P300 because when you put your foot down, this engine is very easy and very quick to respond, and so there is quite a bit of torque for you to make full use of. And so the Defender can get up to pretty silly speeds with relative ease. But of course, if you're looking for a little bit more performance, or perhaps if you want your Defender to be a little bit more capable, particularly when you're out on the open road, then you might be better served by the P400. Because obviously the 3-litre mild hybrid has a little bit more torque off the line thanks to that mild hybrid system, as well as a little bit more headroom when you're out on the motorway. And when you're driving in town, before we get to the motorway bits, when you're driving in town, this car is very comfortable. The air suspension means that it does manage both primary and secondary ride really well. The car settles down quite easily. It doesn't wave and bob the way the old Defender used to. And so it does make this, again, a very pleasant place to be. And on the motorway, it does broadly the same thing, although that's kind of where the Defender falls short ever so slightly. Because while ride is not so bad, handling, on the other hand, is nothing to write home about. This is a Defender after all, which means handling and drivability and agility were not exactly high priorities to the engineers, and that does come through from the driver's seat, because it seems very clear that this is a car that's geared towards comfort, and so to that end, it is very comfortable. But the moment you see any sort of corner, the relatively high center of gravity of the Defender will make itself quite apparent, and you will feel a degree of body lean. But it's not the end of the world, because ultimately this is a comfortable long-distance cruiser. What is a little bit troubling is in terms of NVH. Now, as I mentioned earlier, this car rides on Goodyear Wrangler all-terrain tires, which means there is a little bit more tire roar than you might necessarily expect in a Land Rover at this price point. And because of the Defender's very blocky shape, it means that there is quite a bit of wind noise, perhaps again a little bit more than what you'd expect from a Land Rover at this price point. A Discovery, for example, is a much more hushed place to be. Not that the Defender is particularly loud, but again, things could be a little bit quieter. But when you take into account the Defender's capability, now the press drive for the Land Rover Defender was held out in Namibia, where these cars were tested in sand, they were tested in mud and ruts, they were tested over rock crawls, and it just showed how capable these cars actually are. And so when you understand how capable the Defender is, you are able to make a mental compromise in terms of its on-road capabilities in exchange for those off-road capabilities. And then you get onto this car's safety chops. And so the Land Rover Defender comes as standard with full level 2 semi-autonomy, including things like autonomous emergency braking with pedestrian and cyclist detection. It comes with lane keep assist, blind spot monitoring, that fantastic 360-degree camera with a multi-angle view, as well as various other safety systems, which makes this perfect as a family car. Which means driving your Defender over longer distances would be as painless as driving anything else. And of course, you have the benefit of it looking this good. And to that end, I feel that the Defender doesn't feel like that much of a compromise. Compared to the Mercedes-Benz G-Class, the Defender is a much more refined place to be inside, on the open road, in day-to-day usability, and so on. In terms of NVH and road noise and wind noise, the Defender is a much quieter place to be while still maintaining that lovely, beautiful, chunky off-road look that people so want. On top of that, I feel that the Defender manages to eke out a little bit more in terms of modern convenience technology than what we've seen from the G-Class. For example, this car has proper keyless entry and go, admittedly with a button on the door handle, but it's still better than the G-Class where you actually have to unlock the car from the key fob. And on top of that, you have these heated ventilated seats, this much brighter, lighter, airier cabin, and it just creates a much more upmarket experience, even though the Defender is a good, $500,000 cheaper than a G63? So overall, weirdly, the Defender does actually present pretty good value for what is, at its core, a tough and capable off-roader. If this is the sort of SUV that you're looking for, if you want to be able to cart your family and go on adventures and go off the beaten track, if that's the sort of lifestyle that you lead, then the Defender truly is peerless. The G-Class doesn't even come close, let alone with that double turbocharged V8 engine. This is a much more civilized place to be. But if you feel that your large, chunky off-roader needs to be also as fast as a rat on fire, then maybe you might be better served in a G63. But that is not what the Defender is about. This is about off-road, true, peerless off-road capability matched with truly usable, functional, comfortable, and refined day-to-day usability. And to that end, I recommend the Land Rover Defender very, very highly indeed. Although if you were to ask me, my preferred spec for the Land Rover Defender would be a Defender 90 with the 3-litre engine, because I feel that a little bit more performance, particularly given the way that I use a lot of my cars on the motorway, would be greatly appreciated. But if you're driving primarily in town, then the Defender P300, even in 110 guys, is plenty good. This is a truly fantastic car, and it's been really fun driving this around for the last few days, and I'm very sad to see it go, but ultimately that is the way the cookie crumbles. So that concludes our review of the Land Rover Defender. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up, subscribe to the channel, hit the little bell icon so you're notified every time we make a new upload. Don't forget to follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. All the links are in the description below. Thank you so much for watching. We'll catch you in the next one. Take care, stay safe, and jangan bodoh.